Half-Life 2 shipped with a revolutionary physics system. One could argue that the biggest reason for the game's creation was the physics. But what exactly does physics mean? It's easy to assume we just mean the physical collision engine. But Half-Life does so much more than that. The way sound echoes through the room. The way dust flies up when it's windy. The sound of your shoe hitting the pavement. It's all physics, and Half-Life 2 understood it very well. When you hit something in Half-Life, it makes a sound. But did you know just how many sounds are there? There's sound for light impact, hard impact, scraping and stepping for each surface type in the game. There's different frictions and bullet impacts for whatever you shoot. The extent to which Valve went to make the physics the star of the show is much farther than any other game would go. They, of course, had a very good reason to do so. Their game was a technological marvel, in physics, animation and narrative structure. Now, one difference between me and Valve is that I'm not 82 people, nor am I as rich as them. So excuse me if I have to scale some physics features down, especially since my game is going to be based more so on Half-Life 1, but I still think the way Half-Life 2 handles its interaction between surfaces is too good to pass on, even for a game that technically doesn't need it. I firstly started with bullet impacts, inspired by Half-Life 2, where each surface type has its own particle. Although it greatly affects the amount of work I have to put in the development, I thought it was worth it. Because shootouts in Half-Life 2 feel phenomenal. The bits of rubble flying off the walls as 5 Metro Cops fire your direction. You can almost feel the impact on your skull the bullet would have if it didn't miss into the wall behind you. That's the feeling I wanted to recreate. On the surface, it's not very complicated. We just take the point where the bullet hit, we take the normal, which is a 90-degree angle from the impacted surface, and spawn a particle facing that direction. And I did just that. I created a particle with some rubble, gave it a bit of velocity, and voila! We have a particle for stone impact. Except we don't. The particle felt weak, it didn't feel like concrete breaking away, more so like popcorn flying out of a wall. There was something missing, and so I went to the source to find out what. Fortunately, Garry's mod exists, and while not technically Half-Life, it gives me easy access to most of the game's assets. To realize what my particles did wrong, all I had to do was hit the floor with a crowbar a few times. The conclusions were instant. Firstly, Half-Life's rubble had collisions. It would fall on the ground and stay there for a few seconds after falling. Secondly, there was a puff of dust scattering above the impact. I applied these elements to my particle system, and the improvements were amazing. It went from looking like popcorn to being something I am legitimately proud of. Although my effect is much stronger than Half-Life's, I think it makes the impact look very heavy and definitely gives off "oh wow, I could have lost my head if that thing hit me" feel. As I said, it's going to take a while to create similar particle effects for all kinds of surfaces, especially that I don't have much experience with working with particles, but nevertheless, I think the effort will be worth it. Decals left in spot where the bullet landed are arguably an even bigger staple of FPS games than particles, and Half-Life has them as well. In the first Half-Life, all you'd get is a black dot where your shot landed, but Half-Life 2 one-upped itself by giving each surface its own bullet decal, plus some variation. Now, before I go into any further detail, we have to establish the difference between Source and Unreal Engine decals. For starters, the way decals are applied in Source is based on the model's UV map. UV map is basically a flat version of the model's texture. When you apply a decal to a model in Source, you apply it to this flat texture. But in Unreal, the decal is more projected, like from a movie projector. The decal has an area of effect and will apply itself to anything that is in that area. That is a bit problematic if you want to apply the decal to something that moves, as the decal's area of effect would move also, and I would personally rather avoid the bugginess that might result from moving the projection. Different games deal with it in different ways. I could do what Counter-Strike 2 does and use a dynamic alpha mask edited from line trace impact to reveal a parallax occlusion damage underneath the regular texture, but that feels like a lot of additional work to recreate an effect that did not even exist in the original game. Thus, bullet holes stay on solid surfaces only. As mentioned, Half-Life 2 uses various different bullet hole textures. I decided against that approach, mostly due to the fact I still have to make all the hole textures myself. Cutting the whole variety down to a single one also cuts on my work time, allowing me to put more effort into different parts of the project. But also keep all the holes from looking the same, I added a randomized rotation to each one, ensuring that they aren't the same at first sight, and avoiding the ghosting issue that Source decals have. Whenever you hit any surface in Half-Life, you will hear an impact sound. In the game, that sound is based on the type of impact and its strength. Since my game is not focusing on physics like Half-Life 2 does, I'll be cutting down on the amount of available sound effects, mostly on the account that I hate sound design. Initially, I considered not having any sound effects at all for impacts, but I quickly realized how bad of a decision that would be. I soon noticed how important the sound feedback is to making your hits feel impactful, and without any response, your shots would feel hollow, even with the visual feedback of the particles, especially with melee weapons, which were the closest to the sound source. Fortunately for me, making an impact sound system is the easiest one of the listed above. Unfortunately for me, making the actual sounds is agonizing. Unreal Engine has a very convenient system of physical materials, which allow you to assign surface properties to each material individually. Properties like its type, friction, restitution, and a bunch of other properties you don't care about. The one we have to focus on is surface type, as that's the one that allows us to recognize which particle, decal, and sound effects to load whenever we hit a surface. Fortunately for me, Unreal makes this particular thing very easy, as detecting the surface type is part of the standard collision system. After we collide, we simply check the material of the colliding object, and use a select node to, well, select which asset is appropriate for the surface. This system is surprisingly easy and intuitive for what Unreal Engine usually offers, which makes my work much easier. There are some other things I did not mention, friction or sound dynamics being few things that could fit into this video's topic, but unfortunately, there's only so much time I have to make one video, and I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to talk about the other things some other time. I'm in a lucky position of having finished all of work already, which gives me topics to talk about. Unfortunately, at some point, we'll run out of things I've done and venture into the territory of things I'm doing, which are much harder to actively make videos about. I'd just like to mention it right now, as I'm sure the video output will slow down eventually, and some might worry I cancelled the game. Making these things takes a long time, and not all the development process is as interesting as the physical properties of materials. I will continue to update you on what I'm doing and what I plan to do as soon as I figure out either. But for now, I bid you adieu.